Michael, how are you, guy?
Lawrence, I found something really interesting.
All right. There's an expression I like which goes, who does first need not do best. But I find that our next guest is very often both. Not only is he routinely the first to drop his take on the timeline, but his takes are also very often some of the most prescient and best. So I'm happy to sit down and have a chat with my friend Aristophanes. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going, man? Happy to be here.
Long overdue. All right, so first I got to get your reaction to this Zionist video. Does the Talmud Network send its regards?
I don't know, man. I think I don't know what camp that video necessarily came from, but there's not a whole lot of people on that list there that are related. Like it seems kind of weird how at the very end it was a bunch of like are they really trying to tie like Brett and Eric Weinstein and Ben Shapiro to like be the same camp of people there? Or like Jack Posobiec, or I don't know, it seemed a little bit nonsensical, but to me it just sounded more like a I don't know, just maybe a little bit more like an enemies list, or like these are big accounts that aren't in our camp or whatever, and it just seemed a little bit on the nonsensical side. I mean, I don't think if their particular target is, to try and say that everybody on that list is like a Zionist or something. I don't think I've ever had a positive word for Israel on the timeline ever in years of being on the TL. And
Yeah, sure.
and I've talked about things like APAC interference and all of those issues at length, and not always in a polite tone. So I don't know. I'm just gonna ignore it.
Well, BAP and company are often like lumped in, and there's tons of kind of accusations hurled around. Lots of people on the list, not Jewish or Zionist. So it's kind of like,
Well, and man, it's like I don't know. I've always endeavored to never be interpreted as being part of anyone's group. Like,
yeah,
like I've talked to BAP before, and I read Bronze Age Mindset, but I wouldn't like I don't regularly have a dialogue with BAP or anything. I'm not like a BAP guy. I'm not an
yeah,
NRX guy. Like I look at things that I think are interesting, and so I try to talk to interesting people, and I try to see what is going on pretty much everywhere. And
yes,
I just like to post, man. Like I don't have a business that I shill. I don't have, I'm not a professional writer, even though I've done a little bit of freelance writing, just kind of, for my own gratification here and there when people have asked. But, I don't know. I don't, none of the stuff that happens there is what pays my bills. And so, it's just for fun, just for love of the game.
yeah. You have a day job, you don't need it. So
Yeah.
maybe in some ways that's the best approach, just to do it. I mean, if you don't enjoy doing it, why kind of do it at all?
Well, and I feel bad for the media types who actually have to do that stuff all the time.
Yeah,
Not because, most of them are terrible people, but I just think about what it would be like to have to make your living and pay your mortgage off of,
Elon bucks.
well, or whether it's working for a publication or it's ad revenue or whatever. The problem is there's a really bad incentive for people who do things like that, where they have to always stay relevant and they have to always be the one being talked about. And you're not always going to be the guy who's like on the pulse and knows exactly what's up and has like the hottest take. And so it kind of creates this like spiral where kind of creates this like really bad incentive spiral where it's like, yeah, you might be like on the pulse of whatever current thing topic is going on and know a lot about it, and everybody's looking at what you have to say. But then other times you're not. And so I think it creates this sort of attention-seeking behavior with people where they're chasing, like they always got to have the spotlight because that's where their money comes from.
Yeah,
And that's always going to eventually run its way into like purposefully causing conflict or
yeah. A
having a
clickbaity
bad take.
stuff.
Yeah, well, and not all your takes are going to be good. That's the thing, right? Is, when you have a lot of visibility to what you say and you weigh in on everything, sometimes you're going to be wrong, or sometimes you're going to say something that everybody thinks is retarded, and that's just the nature of the beast. But with media people, it creates a really perverse incentive because you don't have the option that when you have nothing important to say to just like shut up.
Right.
Um,
You're kind of compelled to write. It seems like some accounts which become monetized then feel a kind of compulsion to just put out content, whether it's good, bad, whatever. They're just like, so it, I think, waters down the brand of that particular poster. And I'm not sure if that's a phenomenon that you've noticed or that you would agree
I,
with
I
or not
think
agree with.
so. I think even before ad revenue sharing, I think this was a thing, and I think a lot of it had to do with size, right? Is you would get people who would go run up to, like, I think I had a thread back when I had maybe like 5 or 10K followers called Twitter feudalism, where I likened it to like different ranks of nobility, arguing with each other, and like the reply guys and the different little social cliques and all that, being like medieval warfare. But I remember I said something about how once people get past 100K, they kind of stop being people and they just start being brands. And it's not even just in the way that their audience looks at them. It's the way that they act and the way that they behave. And I've always endeavored to steer clear of that, which is why I don't make a living with any of the stuff that I do on Twitter or anything that I write or any of that. Like, I have a day job. I'm
Yeah.
a consultant. I have my own company. I'm self-employed. Like, I've it's completely separate stuff from anything that I do on social media. And I like keeping it that way because it gives me not only a bit of perspective on things, but also because sometimes I just don't really have anything to say about whatever political moment is going on. And, I just talk about the things I do. Like, maybe I read a
Yeah.
good book, or there's a video game I like or whatever.
Sure,
And
sure.
so I've never wanted to stray into that territory where it's like, you're a big account that acts like a brand. And I think especially before ad revenue, there was this big incentive to where if you got to a certain size, to justify all of the time that you consume doing like posting and doing all that stuff, like a lot of
Sure.
people, they see that as a resource they have now that they have all these eyeballs that they can get on demand, and they go, well, I'm going to go start a business,
Yes.
using it. And
Yes.
the problem is then they become a little bit more risk averse, right? Like, when your
Mm.
livelihood depends on your online brand or whatever you're doing, there becomes a risk factor there that keeps you from maybe either saying risky things or doing something stupid or whatever. And so that's why people start to become a bit more wooden, I think, when they hit that size. And I've always tried to just, no matter how big I get, I just want to be me. I just want to be a guy who likes to post.
Well, I remember after your the famous ChatGPT Dan thread. And as of today, it looks like you're creeping up on about 9 million impressions there. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I remember you also tweeting or zeeting, I'm not sure which we're using now. Back then it would be tweeting, I guess, that like, listen, I got a lot of new followers. And so like it, here's the deal. I talk about this, I talk about that, and if you don't like it, sorry, unfollow me, right? Don't have expectations based upon this. Don't have expectations about what you'll find here. Probably you won't like me, so just be warned. I remember you sending out a kind of warning text like that.
Well, yeah, and part of that was also because I'm not really like, I'm not an AI guy, right? Like
Mm,
like I wasn't the one who came up with the Dan prompt. I found it, and I said as much when I posted it, as I said,
mm.
hey, there's this prompt that's out there for ChatGPT, and you can do this and that with it. Um and that attracted a lot of different types of people to follow me. And there's like I'm on Twitter lists where people, have like AI accounts, right? And it'll
Yeah.
be like me because of that one time that I was, right off the cuff, just ended up hitting on something before anybody else on Twitter did.
Yes. Yes.
But then all the other ones, you'll have like AI researchers and people who actually know what they're talking about. Whereas for me, I'm
Right.
shooting from the hip. I'm, whatever I think is probably the case if I have an opinion on something, but I'm not an
Mm,
expert.
mm.
And so that was part of it is I was like, well, this is not like an AI account, right? Anyone who's
Yeah.
here, don't follow me because you think you're going to get like, cogent takes on AI all the time. That's not really what I'm about.
Yeah. The
Um,
next tweet may be a review of a kid's book. So like
yeah.
prepare yourself accordingly and fuck off if you want to like have expectations about what I'm ought to be tweeting here for your benefit here. But
Yeah, and that was the thing is it was a lot to navigate because I mean I was a good sized account when that thread happened. I think I had somewhere around 20K followers or
sure.
something.
Yeah.
Which back then was a lot for like a right-wing Twitter account.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah,
were
for
always
sure.
getting smashed down. But I went to like 70K off of that almost within like by
Mm.
the end of the week, which I don't
Yeah.
think I've ever seen that happen before. And
It was wild. It was wild. I mean, as we've discussed, I've followed you for a while, and I feel like I came across your account once in a space, although I didn't realize spaces were that old, but I'm not sure if they go back to 22, but I was checking and yeah, I've got a screenshot. I thought this is an account I'd like to invite on, and that was back, 10,000 what it was like September of 22. So like very shortly after that when that Dan post came out, it was like, yo, this is, I imagine your phone was just blowing up. What is that experience like to kind of have just an insane viral tweet?
it kind of sucks because it feels like the world brain is looking at you while that's going on. And
Yeah, it is
y-
actually.
usually what I do is I just ignore everything when that's going on. Like I don't have any Twitter notifications on my phone at all, except for DMs. That's the only thing that I have turned on for
Yeah,
notifications. So, whether it's group chats or whether it's a post or anything like that that's, going off the chain, I don't know about it until I look. And I do that on purpose so that I'm not just constantly having my attention pulled.
yes, I think that's smart. I think that's healthy.
So it's, so I usually if I do something really big and there's a lot of, especially if it's like new eyeballs,
Yeah,
there's like a theme that you can see. If you have a tweet that breaks escape velocity, you start to realize it mostly because you start to see really retarded replies. And it's usually because it hits like what I call Genpop of Twitter
okay.
is when you start showing when something you've posted shows up in like the For You tab or something like that,
Yeah,
you start getting just random, very, average people with like sports teams in their bios and just like normal guys who don't occupy the political space. And a lot of the time people who use Twitter in a very passive way where they're mostly consuming information, they're not putting anything
sure.
out themselves. So you just start seeing like random, really bizarre takes that are off kilter compared to the actual like kind of community sphere that you inhabit on the site. And that's,
Yeah.
that's usually the point where I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna jump off of this and go do something for a couple hours, and then once
Mhm.
things slow down a bit, then maybe I'll go and take a look and see what people were saying because it's too much to keep up with.
You're getting shivved by randos and Gen Pop out there on the
On
in the
the yeah, out there in the yard, you
yeah,
don't it's
exactly.
your gang
Petty
is pretty
criminals.
small. Yeah, your gang is suddenly really small compared to Gen Pop when that happens. But um
Just kind of ontologically so that we're on the same page, what is your preferred name for our side of Twitter? You hear frog Twitter or dissident right or hard right. What is a name that you feel comfortable self-applying to this, whatever this is?
I don't know, man. It's there's been so many shifts in that where I remember when everything was the DR and everything was frog Twitter and everything was, I remember the alt-right before that, all those things.
Sure.
And the labels just kind of change. So I usually don't want to be labeled with anything in particular, so I just kind of stay out of it. But whether it's right-wing Twitter, frog Twitter, DR, alt-right, whatever. I mean, yeah, it doesn't really matter. It'll change like a month or two from now. Everyone will find some other way to term it. But I think it
Yeah.
seems to jive a lot with as soon as the media and as soon as the lefties start using one of those terms to describe everybody
Yes.
pretty often, then everybody goes and all of a sudden the term is lame and everybody moves over to something else and there's some new term to describe everybody.
And in some ways, you don't want to self-apply with anything that you're going to abandon eventually for that very reason, you know?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too, is it's and it's not always as descriptive, right? Like Frog Twitter was, the whole point is that, a very large portion of our sphere are, 4chan, Anon alums, and
Yes. Yes.
whether it's old school or, relatively recent to the 2016 election or what have you, and
Yes.
and that's really changed a lot because for both better and worse, a lot of regular people have, you know, really taken a look at their ideas and what they think about things and which side they're kind of on politically, and there, especially there's been a lot of young guys, a lot of Zoomers who, they're coming up in the world and they're, you know, getting into different political philosophies and thinking about things differently. And so, a lot of them are, frogs in spirit, but then a lot of these people who are new are not, you end up seeing like, weird libertarian hedge fund investors and like tech bros from Silicon Valley, and they're definitely not frogs. That's
Yeah,
not
for
really the
sure.
background they come from. And sometimes those guys fold right in, or sometimes they have their own ideas, and sometimes they show up and act like they own the place, and everyone kind of wants them to just go away and fuck off. But
Yeah, I mean, we're not now. Elon Musk himself is sort of in the dissident right, and now that Trump will be back in office, does a dissident portion of the label actually apply anymore? Just the right, or the
yeah, I
guy,
mean, we'll
the
see
guys in
we'll see over the
power?
next couple of months, right? Like
Yeah,
I don't know, man. I just usually when people try to ask me to describe like political ideology or anything like that, I mean, just saying right winger is usually,
good enough.
accurate enough while being ambiguous and vague. I mean,
Yeah,
I'd probably put my political ideology somewhere around being like a Pat Buchanan paleocon or something like that. But
sure.
um
It's complicated to explain that in a in a blurb to the average person. So he's sort of
well, yeah, sure,
using
right.
a
The average person who's not a political spurg, yeah.
yeah a Buchananite. As your account has grown and you have a greater reach, have you ever had a moment of like, well, maybe I should be cautious or less cautious? Or, as you mentioned before, a lot of times people hit a certain number and they're sort of defanged in a way. They don't want to take risks, or that it influences their choices in terms of the things that they post. Have you gone through a process of shooting from, you know, 20 to 140, I think you're at now, something like that?
Almost.
Yeah. Have you had any sort of reflection in that regard about when you sit down to post, you're like, oh, dude, I can't just Bob's Vagine it up here anymore. I got to actually say something.
I mean, sometimes, at least for your reputation, right? Like you, I don't know, you definitely do worry a little bit more about having a bad take, right? Like you go,
Yeah,
okay, am I being retarded here? Before,
sure.
a lot of the time though, I especially with retweets, I'll just throw caution to the wind and I'll try to retweet, pretty edgy stuff if I think it's funny or if
Sure.
it's insightful or something. But I think to a degree, it's sometimes there's a degree of risk, but the other thing is that you get so much visibility that sometimes you just don't want to deal with
Yeah,
controversy because it gets annoying and it gets fatiguing.
yeah.
Um,
Calling Jordan Peterson's daughter a slut or whatever. It's like, okay, I'm not even going to go there.
yeah, and I've went pretty hard at Jordan Peterson, for instance, for like other things or a lot of these
Sure.
people,
His
but
anonymous troll demon comment for one, and that's something I'd like to discuss with you
yeah,
too. But
well, yeah, and it's I just think that you when you get this much visibility, you just kind of get tired of wading through, bullshit or I don't know, you start to have a certain tolerance for bullshit where you're like, yeah, like to tweet enough to get to this size, you kind of have an idea about how a certain post is probably going to go. And
Sure.
so you start to go, is this post worth it? No, probably not really.
Hmm.
And so it's not so much out of like it's not so much out of self-preservation or anything like that. It's I think
Yes.
people just get you just get fatigued with it, like
Sure.
courting controversy all the time. So you start
Sure.
to do it in smarter ways in terms of the language that you use
Yes.
because
Yes.
it's easier to defend. And I think that's what a lot of people see as like big accounts getting watered down or things like that.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too is, to one degree or another, you do end up having something that you develop in like I was getting banned all the time in the Parag, era before Musk bought
Mm.
Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah. Have
But
you have you
eventually you get
respawned ever?
attached. Huh? Oh, a
Have you?
million times. Yeah,
Okay.
there's probably been like 10 or 12 different Aristo accounts, and I
Yeah.
had tons of accounts before that under different
Yeah.
monikers. But I think at a certain point, though, if you actually do start to leave a mark and a lot of people know, your persona as a poster and things like that, you do kind of get attached to an identity. And whether you like it or not, eventually there is a certain degree of concern for preserving it.
Sure.
You don't want to go speed run, off a cliff and get your 130K account suspended over just some stupid cheap shot, that nobody's going to care
Yeah.
about or think about in a day.
You're just Naruto running yourself off a cliff there. No good.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big criticisms that happens of big accounts pretty often from a lot of people who just don't understand or who don't care. Um, you can be critical about things in a more intellectual or less vulgar, veneer.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think there's a lot of small accounts that like they're still at that point where they're like, yeah, I'm just going to keep speed running and they're going to suspend me and then I'm going to respawn. And that's all fine and good. Like I've been there. I remember what all that was like. But the thing is it really productive at the macro level, right? Compared to if you have enough reach to where you've got, people in the US government following you or people in the
Correct.
media who are following you and their publications are exposed to your thought process. So there's a lot of things that are downstream of anons, and it's like, is it really worth giving up that type of thumb on the scale, to
Access as well, I think, because now, and this is something I'd like to talk about a little bit later, but you have legit publications and legit and respected magazines now. And so, in terms of like, if I suspect if you were to submit an article and they would just could easily go online and be like, no, man, this is like your Twitter feed is just this spewing bile craziness. And yeah, this is a great article you've written, but not sure if we want to associate with the persona which you built online any
you know, I
necessarily.
it depends. It depends on what you do to actually get to that point because when I would say probably the biggest publication I've ever written for was the Federalist.
Yes, yes.
And the thing is the temperament there, like I've talked to Mark Hemingway, who's Molly Hemingway's husband. I've talked to Mark Hemingway. He's a good guy, Gen Xer, pretty normal as far as politics go, but he has like a certain degree of tolerance for looking at other viewpoints and being willing to endure the criticism of the whole, oh, you're platforming someone who said this, even if it was a year ago or if it was a week ago or whatever. He just likes the ideas and values the ideas. He's a pretty open-minded guy when it comes to stuff like that. And even the same thing with, Claremont and the American Mind have kind of been that way. Um, I don't really worry about any of that because I'm not a writer by trade.
Yes.
So, but I'm sure a lot of people do, though. I'm sure a lot of people who want to get into the media business and they want to be writers and they want to be professional writers, and maybe get a consistent gig with a magazine or a publication where they're, doing a couple articles a month for somebody and getting paid and making it their job. I'm sure those people care a lot about that. For me, I really don't because I mean I haven't written anything professional in a while. Um,
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
probably do something sometime. I don't know,
I
but
think I've seen some bit in Bitcoin magazine you published here
yeah,
in
I do.
24.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do the quarterly print edition for Bitcoin
Yes.
Magazine, and honestly, it's just because I really like being part of the process there. It's cool to have to be in something that's a physical product that you can hold in your hand. It's a pretty professional magazine. It's got some interesting stuff in there, and I liked the editors there who reached out to me when I was a much smaller account are really good guys, and I like working with them, and I like seeing the process of getting like a traditional magazine done, mostly like the graphic artists and
Yeah. Yeah.
layout people and all that. I just think it's fascinating, so that's why I've always been on board to help them out with that every quarter for the print edition. But
Is this
um,
something you dabble in as well, Bitcoin, and that's kind of adjacent to your personal
yeah,
interest?
yeah. I mean, I'm amateur hour, but I do mess around with crypto and things like that. But most of all those is just that I've observed politically, going back a couple years that there was definitely a political shift already happening, where Bitcoiners and the crypto community in general is either apolitical or is some flavor of being on the right. And I kind of started to notice when I first started the relationship with Bitcoin Magazine that I would kind of like skim a lot of people who followed me, and a lot of the time it would be people who had, Bitcoin or other crypto references in their bio, and I was like,
Yes.
well, go figure. The whole crypto was kind of considered apolitical at the time. Like if we're looking like a couple years back, there were a lot of
Sure.
libertarian types, a lot of stuff like that, but at the end of the day, the entire interest in, crypto at large, including Bitcoin, is a distrust or a
Correct.
abandonment
Correct.
of the current financial system. People are like,
Yeah.
why am I going to go invest, on the stock market where my returns are X and Y, and institutional investors have like this first mover advantage I can't compete with easily
Yes.
when I can
Pelosi, for
go to
example.
crypto.
Yeah.
So, naturally a
Alternate
dis
systems.
yeah, so a distrust of the established banking system is always going to end up skewing towards the right.
Yes.
And I think we've seen that play out. The DNC were extremely hostile towards crypto even in this last election, and then Trump kind of realized to go arms all the way open and basically say, oh yeah, we're going to do great things for crypto. We'd rather have all of that money and interest here in the United States than have it be in China or something.
Yeah, and that was a
So
strong move politically. I'm sure he must have predicted that as well.
yeah, so I think I kind of saw the read the tea leaves on that a couple of years ago and kind of
Mm,
started to notice it that like, man, I've got a lot of followers who are into Bitcoin,
yeah.
and you don't meet very many left wingers who are into, crypto at all. I
Or
mean, they're out there,
anything
but
productive whatsoever.
yeah.
So you're definitely a noticer of things. I know. So you've chosen as your avatar the Greek playwright Aristophanes. Tell me your connection there. Why have you chosen this as your avatar?
Um, so a long time ago, I was actually reading a thread on 4chan that was talking about and this was years ago. I mean,
Sure.
probably maybe 2007, 2008. And um and it was about the Aristophanes play Assembly Women, where
Mm,
the women of Athens, they get up bright and early and they dress themselves up as men and they go to the assembly and they basically outvote all of the men to just change everything overnight
yes.
to like run the government the way they want to.
A
And it
gynocentric
shows,
government.
yeah, and so most of the men, they're sleeping in, they don't, they're the city leaders are talking about how even paying people to show up to assembly is still like a lot of the men just aren't showing up.
Yeah.
Um, they just don't care. And so all the women just decide, okay, well, one day we're just all going to show up. We're going to pretend we're men. We're going to get let into the assembly, and then we're just going to take over. And so they do that, and it's very funny, and it holds up really, really well.
Sure. Sure. And he was
But
very critical, of course, of politics in his days. So
well,
I can see a connection there for sure.
so what ends, obviously what ends up happening, the women go ahead and they immediately institute like full bore abolishment of private property, full communism, sexual equity. And this is
Yeah.
a keep in mind this is a comedy. So if you think about the time in which it was written, these were things that were very preposterous to any Athenian would be like, oh yeah, put the women in charge. That'll be great, And
As it turns out, however,
yeah, and then we look at present day, right? And we go, oh
yes,
yeah, they did all the things. When people had to think about what it would be like to have women having an expanded, rate of participation in politics, like they kind of knew what women would gravitate towards, which was a bunch of really horrible shit. And then, fast forward 2000 years later or more, um, and that's exactly what they do. Like you could have someone like Ocasio-Cortez play Praxagora, like the lead woman and
mm,
assemblywoman who
mm,
organizes all of them, and she wouldn't even think it's a she wouldn't even
yeah,
think it's a comedy. She would just think it was a story. Like she would approve
documentary
of all
maybe.
those things. Yeah. And so the long and short of it though is that that got me into the classics. And I was probably like
Yes,
17 or so when I got that interest. And so I read Aristophanes, but that also led to Epictetus and Heraclitus and Homer and all these different um classical philosophers and playwrights and things like that. But the thing I realized was that there was just really nothing new under the sun, right? Like all of Aristophanes' plays are very relevant to they still hold true. Like they're fundamental elements of how humans behave, how men and women behave and problems and things like that. But I also really likened his personality back then um to kind of what was going on 4chan at the time.
yes,
Because of the fact that, Aristophanes, for instance, he was anti-war, and one of the things that, well, a particular war, and he
the
was very
Peloponnesian
infamous
War.
for, yeah, the Peloponnesian War. He wrote many plays that were critical of it, and basically said it was just, it was their equivalent to the military-industrial complex of the time.
Absolutely.
Was Cleon and all these guys, like what he wrote in his play The Knights is, pretty much just like this war is terrible. It's been going on for way longer than it should. It's costing society, like it's costing Athenian society both like economically but also socially and culturally. And it's just to enrich, this martial class of generals and stuff who like it's not serving the people well. And so that's why so many of his plays are critical of it. Lysistrata is about ending it, The Knights is about how it's a sham. And I just saw a lot of kind of synergy with what was going on in the zeitgeist of Anons around, right around the time, maybe a year or two before Trump's first term.
Okay.
And his plays. And so, I had other handles and stuff, but I had to respawn one time after I got suspended for something. And then I was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, how about I had been rereading the collected plays of Aristophanes,
Yes.
and I just kind of had this thought. I said, well, these are all things like Assembly Women are all comedies. And I said, but when it's played straight in the current year, then it's not a comedy, it's a tragedy because it's actually real.
Yeah.
And so I think my first moniker under this was like Aristo's underscore tragedy or something like that. Um, Banned many years ago at this point,
Okay.
but um,
Dead.
yeah, there've been several iterations of Aristo that are all
Mhm.
banned. But what was funny though was that when Musk bought Twitter, I had been appealing like every week. I would hop on and I would appeal some of my accounts, and
Yeah.
the account that I have now was actually suspended at the time when Musk bought Twitter, and it
Oh,
was my
wow.
highest follower account that I had. And so what I had been doing is I had just been over and over and over again, like every couple of days, I would appeal and open up a new ticket and
Mm.
continuously bump all of my tickets to appeal my suspension.
Yeah.
Um, and I was just hoping that at some point there would be some Indian guy at Twitter who would just open the support queue and be like, I'm tired of this guy
Um,
emailing. I'm just going to hit the OK button and he's going to be
Done.
back.
Yeah.
That's what I
You
was
win through
hoping.
persistence here. Were you getting feedback like, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to reinstate. Okay, I'll just file again.
No, they sometimes you'll get an you back then at least you would get an automated message that would say, it was, whatever, maybe your thing was final. But if you waited like 3 or 4 days, like and you went and submitted a new email for that, it would create a ticket, and
Yes.
sometimes you would get a human response. So my idea was I'm always going to have a ticket that's there because I know the mindset of a customer service or an IT guy is
Sure, sure.
your whole day revolves around what tickets you have on the board, and anything that stays open for too long, you're eventually going to get pestered about it.
Mm.
So you're just going to want to get rid of it. You're just going to want to close it. But anyway, the whole idea didn't really work. And then Musk bought Twitter, and I just kept on appealing. And
Yeah.
then what was
Enough of the right
weird,
people were fired in that period of time to finally penetrate it into someone who could actually
something,
reinstate.
well, so something happened. It was like maybe a week or two after Musk bought Twitter, and what ended up going down was a lot of people started to get unsuspended. And then my current account that I use today was unsuspended. And then the account that I had been using, like my latest incarnation, as well as one of my burners,
Sure.
those both got suspended like immediately. And I
Oh,
don't know, I never got any feedback or anything, but it felt like, here you go, here's your biggest account, but we're banning all of your alts. And I just let it lie and was like, okay, fine.
that's a deal I'll take. I'll take that deal. Let's move forward on it. Maybe that's
Yeah.
what it is. Like maybe, you know, multiple accounts under more or less the same moniker, and they're like, we'll just consolidate it. We'll give you the biggest one and have fun, be responsible with this one. Maybe.
Hmm.
What is your sort of your origin story in terms of your interest in words? So that's one of the things that I'm most interested in, and all of the interviews that I do are based upon people who are writing or have some sort of interest in like language and words. You describe reading stories, reading books. Um, where did that begin? What do you think sparked that in your young brain when you were, I'm saying young brain, I'm assuming it
Yeah,
happened when you were a
whenever,
kid, right?
I mean, I had always been a good reader, and I think, just kind of had an autodidact personality.
Yeah.
I was the type of kid who would never do his homework unless he could finish it in class, but I would, go home and read, a huge freaking book. A combination of just probably my mom reading
Okay. Did your parents
Chronicles
read
of
you as
Narnia,
kids?
and yeah, probably my mom reading Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings to me
Yeah,
when I
perfect.
was little.
Yeah.
So
I
that was a
can't
big one for
I can't
me.
count the number of people who have like grown up on the C.S. Lewis books. It's I mean that he's done a service to humanity, both of
Yeah, I
them,
always tell
Tolkien.
people, because I'm in, I've got two little kids, and I'm
Yes.
in, a couple different dad chats, that revolve around Twitter with
Yeah.
other anons
Yeah.
that are dads, and
Yeah.
I always tell them, I'm like, yeah, like the holy trinity of like good series to like read to your kids that are kind of engaging is like Redwall, Chronicles of Narnia, and Lord of the Rings. And
Yes.
there's other good stuff out there, but that's stuff that's good when they're at the age where they can listen and they can
Mhm.
understand what you're saying as you're reading it, but they're not quite at the point where they're gonna go, read an entire book without pictures to themselves.
Sure. What age do you think more or less is a good age to start them off on that?
I think maybe like maybe for stuff that's got that level of complexity, maybe six at the earliest, but
Okay.
obviously, maybe five, like late 5-year-old, up
Yeah.
to, obviously like 7 and 8 is when they're gonna, have the patience to just chill and just listen to what you're saying the most. And they're
Mhm.
gonna, they're already gonna be reading by then themselves, so you can have them read certain words, or you can show them words they don't know the meaning of, so they can
Yeah.
see how they're spelled,
Yeah.
and that kind of keeps them into it. Um, but no, I don't know. I had a lot of things. I mean, one, I was an only child,
Okay.
so I had a
Okay.
lot of time to myself. Um, my dad passed when I was in middle school, so I
Okay.
ended up having even more time to myself with just like me and an internet connection. My
Yeah.
mom was a nurse and she worked late, and
Yeah.
so
So you were
so I
home
had
alone.
yeah, so I had a lot of my youth, I had a lot of time that I spent alone, and I had books, and I had video games, and I had the internet,
Yes.
and
Yes.
just
You
tons of unsupervised alone time. So,
dangerous too. You do discuss in your article California Dreaming in I Am 1776 some of that, and it's very personal what are your feelings about sharing things that are very personal in that way? Obviously, I would direct anyone to read that if
I
they,
mean, it depends on, I think growing up in California in the 90s, back when things still had a semblance of stability and order over there, it was still, and especially if you were away from the cities, because they're always, like 10 years behind what's going on in Los Angeles and San
sure,
Francisco.
sure.
It was a good place and a good time to grow up. So I think
Yes.
probably a very large part of my political animus is directed at the fact that the place that I grew up in doesn't exist anymore as it did. Like
Mm,
no
mm,
place is kind of like that anymore.
yeah. You're being
And
erased
yeah,
in
and
some way.
and I think most of my motivation, and political anger comes from that, right? Is like, how come I got to grow up in, you know, obviously things weren't perfect. A lot of the seeds that, have kind of bloomed into these problems had already been sown in the
Yes,
90s. So I'm not saying the 90s was perfect or,
sure.
all we got to do to fix this is return to the 90s, like some classical liberal James
Yeah,
Lindsay hack.
yeah.
Um, but it was
But
still a good time.
there's something to be said. I always joke that I think America peaked at Van Halen, but in fact, I think the middle 90s really may have been the peak America. And so it's very interesting. I'm not sure if you have memories that it seems to me that the millennial set are doing the most right now, particularly on what we're referring to as the kind of dissident right. I assume BAP and all the rest are, for the most part, millennials. And
Yeah.
so as a Gen X, I feel like I'm not sure what happened to my people. They kind of dipped out a bit.
Well, I
But
think a
for,
lot of it we're the prototype of an online generation. We're the
yes,
first generation that had the potential to be very online from a young
yes,
age. And not
yes,
all of us were, because not everybody had, we grew up with like dial-up and stuff like that.
sure.
The Zoomers are truly the very first completely online generation. But
Yes.
um
But you
but
have
mo
if you look, for example, at Trump and his VP pick, a millennial.
mhm.
So there's a very kind of it's the dog that didn't bark. The Gen X is kind of skipped over in a way. So
Yeah.
I'm very
They,
curious by
they're
that.
out there. So the thing that I've noticed with Gen Xers is I've had a couple really great Gen Xers who have, done me a solid or seen potential. And they help in their own kind of passive way, but they don't really seem to want the attention.
It's like a middle child, maybe.
Like some of my big opportunities that I had in writing is the first time that anyone offered, said, "Hey, I want you to write something for my publication, we'll
Yeah.
we'll give you, we'll pay you like $200 or something to write an article about this," was James Paulos over at the American Mind. And so James Paulos was the first person who ever reached out to me and said, "Hey man, I like this thread that you wrote. Would you be
Okay.
willing to rewrite it in like an article, like a long form article format and publish it on the American Mind?" And I was like, and I'd never thought about that. I didn't go to college. I had not written an essay that wasn't just like a, stream of consciousness thread on Twitter. I hadn't written like an actual essay that was fit for publishing since like high school, you know?
This is
So,
accidental revolution you're referring to.
yeah, yeah. So that was the first thing that I ever wrote that was published, and it was based off of a thread that I wrote that James Paulos really liked, and he wanted me to,
Yeah.
to gussy it up a little bit uh for the American Mind. But
Mm.
he's a Gen Xer, and he was a guy who took a chance on me, and especially back then I was a relatively volatile poster at the time.
Sure.
Um, but then also Mark Hemingway at the Federalist. He's
Yes.
he's a Gen Xer, and he's very patient with people and he's an excellent writer.
Mm.
Most of the stuff he does is editing,
Sure.
but I've seen, his writing and going through and getting something published and having him edit it and looking at his process. He's one of the most technically proficient writers I've ever
Mm.
known. And he's
Mm.
he's a Gen Xer, and he's very
Yeah.
gracious with his time to people. And
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, he's if a lot of anons like have a lot of like, for lack of a better word, like hoe scaring qualities,
Yeah.
Mark Hemingway is a very legitimate credentialed guy
Yes.
who is like he's like the hoe that cannot be scared. Like there's no like he's not afraid of any of like our terminally online weird zany stuff. Like he's
Yes.
it doesn't even mean he's necessarily into it, but he's a guy who's mature enough to where he can, look at stuff and go, "Yeah, I don't know about that, but it
Yes.
doesn't really bother me much." Like there's no big
Mhm.
emotional knee-jerk response there
Mhm.
from him. So he's good. There's a lot of Gen Xers who are like that, and or even like Michael Anton. I've never spoken to him, but
Yes.
like when he platformed BAP on the American Mind, um, the thing I've noticed is there's a lot of Gen Xers who are established people who finally are getting some degree of managerial power in the, institutions and companies they work in.
Yes.
And when it comes to politics, a lot of them prefer to kind of sit in the shadows and be enablers and like go ahead and like give the green light to give some resources or attention to an anon or an opportunity or to network or to do anything like that with an
Yes.
anon, because on some level they know that with how the baby boomers politics are, they know the boomers will hate it. Like
Yes.
that feels like the vibe. Every time that a Gen Xer has ever like tipped the hat to a millennial or a Zoomer anon, it feels like it was always out of spite to the boomers,
Well,
and not necessarily for us.
and it's funny too, because I have very clear memories of applying for jobs in the 90s, and that was still a time like, hey man, your hair is too long. You can't get a job here. You got a visible tattoo. That's not going to work. Or like you have ear piercings. No. So it was the Gen X, it was my generation that kind of broke that. And you'll go into any basic, I don't know. I don't go out a lot, but it generally people you find anyone, people with dreadlocks and facial tattoos and facial piercings. The entire thing came afterwards, right? So a lot of the millennials and the generations that have come past don't have a memory of that, right? Though, like the kind of, what was that song, I guess, by a band called maybe Tesla or something, the signs, and he puts his hair up under his hat and he went in and, applied for a job and he, imagine me working for you. A song like that doesn't work anymore because you could be a flaming transgender with a facial tattoo and sue someone for not hiring
Well,
you at
yeah,
their
and
company.
and that's the thing is, looking back at it now, I think I was in the last gasp of that. I think like when I got my
Mm,
first high school job in like 2005, like the
okay.
first like real job I ever got.
Yeah.
I think it was still kind of like that to where like obviously nobody wanted to hire you if you had like gauges or something, right? That would have been
Sure.
gauges would have been a job killer. A hand or a face tattoo or a neck tattoo would have been a job killer still.
Yeah.
Um, but now it's like, man, now I look at it and I'm like, you know what? We should go back to that. We need to tell people to quit being
It's
fucking ugly at work.
the sort
Um,
of the dysgenic crowd. Maybe the boomers were protecting us for that, and you can blame Gen X for
well, they,
breaking it.
like all things the boomers do, they were just like sitting on the shoulders of giants and stable norms that had been around forever and just kind of, letting them decay. So
Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
they would take credit for it if you asked, but it's
Mm,
not like you could have had those things, with the greatest generation or the ones before
mm,
that. I don't think in the
mm.
Depression anyone was going to get hired if they had a face tattoo.
Oh man, I don't even know if anyone had a face tattoo back
Probably
then.
not, yeah. Maybe
But
maybe some, weird, merchant marine who's been to the
sh-
Orient and got really drunk one time, but
yeah, I mean, and then you're in Barnum and Bailey Circus getting a job as a freak. But and it's funny too because you know the fat man in the circus then is an average Walmart shopper nowadays.
yeah,
So
yeah. The bearded lady is not that rare anymore,
Jesus Christ. So one of the things that I've always felt in the people that I've interviewed, there's some kind of a pain or a pinch or something that has sparked the idea of the logos inside of people. Um, and I'm curious, as you are a GWOT veteran, if there's any kind of nexus between your experiences there and the kind of, because it seems to me that the seed of language was planted early
Well,
early.
So
Indeed.
for, I mean, I would say the foundation of my logos, obviously military service, refined a lot of what was already there.
Yes.
But I think if I had to sum up, and maybe for a lot of millennials, this is the same way just because of the time in which we grew up. But for me, it was a combination of having a childhood and a really good time to be a kid, the
Yes.
90s and stuff. And then, my dad died. And then 2 months later, 9/11 happened.
Mm.
And then, I graduated high school in 2007. And then the next year, the banking crash happened.
Yeah. Fun time to be
Um,
alive, wasn't it?
yeah. And so I think for me, I got pissed off by all of those things because I wanted them back, right? And it's not something you ever can have back because your childhood is always going to be something you look at through rose-colored glasses. But
Yeah,
I think that's a
typically.
motivation for a lot of millennials on the right is knowing like having these hazy memories of like, yeah, the time in which I grew up was very good. It was wholesome. It was more homogenous. It was,
Yes.
a great time to be a kid. We society valued and prioritized and catered to children and families in a way that they don't today.
Yes.
Um, and just maybe a bit of anger that all of
Mhm.
that, has been being chopped away at and wanting to, bring things back. And a lot of us are parents now who have
Yes.
kids of our own.
Yes.
And, we're all trying, I think every parent who I guess feels like they had a good childhood tries to recreate a lot of their childhood things for their own kids.
Yes.
Or if
Mm,
you had a bad childhood, you think about what a good childhood was like and you try to give that to your kids. But
sure.
um, I think that's a big motivator for a lot of us is, hey, look at, we got to kind of straddle the old world and then
Yes.
hell
Yes.
world. And
Yes.
GWOT is
Yes.
part of that for a lot of people, especially for maybe like elder millennials who are, early 40s, late 30s now.
Yes.
Um, you know, for a lot of those people, some of them enlisted or commissioned like not long at all after 9/11.
Sure.
Went
Or
through the whole GWOT.
because of
Well,
9/11,
yeah,
many
yeah,
have.
and the thing
Yeah.
is but look at how all those things ended. I don't need to tell you, but there's a definite difference in perspective in the military when you take a veteran who gets out and then goes and has to get a regular job and fit
Yes.
in society versus someone who does 20 years active duty and gets a pension.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
there's a very different mindset, and I noticed that veterans are all some degree of cynical or angry, and maybe it's the visibility of okay, well, experiencing working for the government,
Mm.
um, seeing the decline of the military into all of this HR,
Yes.
longhouse garbage.
Yes.
Because, when I enlisted, it was, I enlisted in January of 2008. So that would have
Okay.
been, a couple weeks before Obama got inaugurated. And destroying an institution, it takes time, it takes momentum, it takes a couple years, right? So
Yes.
the first half of my, 8 years that I was in the military was obviously just completely, Bush era, immediate 9/11 era guys. Like the military was still normal-ish. Like it still kind of worked the way it was supposed to.
Yes.
Um, so I got to see those changes.
Yes.
I think it's just all about contrasting changes. I think there's a lot of people who are angry about that. There's a lot of
Mm.
people who, have inspiration to write and to kind of tap into their emotions on that. But, you know, that's not counting any more individualized experiences that people go through in the military. But at scale, we saw the military get worse.
Yes.
We saw the way that the VA treats people. We got to have the wonderful experience of working for the government more generally, which is
Yes.
terrible. Um,
And in the end, the sense that the sacrifice that was made there was futile, or was
well,
made
yeah, look at the
for nothing.
Afghanistan pullout, right? Look at what's
Jesus.
going on in
Yes.
Iraq today, where you've got, frickin' Shia militias controlling everything.
Yes.
It just the whole thing kind of feels pointless. And there's a movie about the Iraq War coming out
Mm,
sometime.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think I saw
I
some
guess
about
that
that.
I guess it's like Alex Garland and then there's an Iraq vet who went into the movie industry who's directing it. I don't know if it'll be good or not. Who knows?
Mm.
If it's a war movie for its own sake that doesn't have any distractions, that would be kind of nice. We haven't had one of those in a while, kind of like
Yeah.
Black Hawk Down.
Yeah. Just a
But
straight nice war flick.
yeah, I know. Just give us a freaking war movie. But I saw
Yeah.
something on someone shared something from TikTok on the timeline, and it shows some guy talking about just has subtitles that he's pointing up to, and I guess he's pointing at like the theatrical release, like the trailer screenshot for
Okay.
that Iraq war movie, and it says, only in America will we invade your country, spend 20 years, destroying it. Or no, no, we'll declare war on your country and we'll destroy it, and 20 years later we're gonna write movies about how sad it made our soldiers to do that.
Man. Yeah, this
And I
is
mean
the
it,
new
it was
export.
yeah, it was kind of funny there. But yeah, that's it's true though, right? We didn't really achieve anything there.
Yeah.
And I don't think we were ever supposed to when you
Uh,
think about the people at the top levels of government. And I think a lot of GWOT vets feel very betrayed by that.
yes. Yes, definitely. All the ones that I've talked to. So not everyone's able to walk away from the GWOT with a kind of value added experience. And so I look at it. Yeah, I was in a team room in 10 in Baghdad, and the commanding officer was instructed to do Obama's repeal of the don't ask, don't tell. And he
Hmm.
was a Christian and an SF dude. And he's like, nah, nah. He passed it to the XO, and he walked out. And so the XO speed read through the PowerPoints of the repeal of don't ask, don't tell. And
Yeah.
and everyone kept groaning, and everybody's like, and he, being the good soldier that he was, hey, shut up. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Fuck it. We're done. Get out. All right, this is over. I mean,
Yeah.
there was jeerings and shit out of everyone. But my sense is that the entire experience is something like a bad acid trip. And so I'm maybe you've never done acid, but or wouldn't admit to it, but it's something like a car crash. Okay, so if you think of a car crash, you hear endless stories of the only person that survived the car crash was the drunk driver, and the
Yeah.
and the entire other family was killed. And so if you use that as a kind of a symbol, like why did the driver not die? Because in the moment of impact, he was drunk, he was maybe asleep, he was relaxed, he went into the experience loose, while the other party flinched and tensed up. And like a bad acid trip, if you fight it, you're going down. And if you submit to it and relax yourself and let it happen to you, then generally you'll come out more or less okay. So it seems to me the people who come out of this experience very, like, it was ridiculous, but um if I get flinched up on it and start to fight that experience in my own mind, it will lead to sort of sickness or a kind of unanswered questions that can really plague you. And I think to sort of like, it was what it was. Let's move on. Let's relax our gut over it, and just let's like let's not dwell on it. I think those are the people that tend to come away from it a little bit more successfully.
Well, yeah, or at least compartmentalizing
Sure.
the whole experience a bit to where you can understand the parts of the military that you liked and you can understand the parts that you didn't, right? Whether it was this time and place. And this comes up a lot when people on right-wing Twitter talk about, should you enlist or, is being in the US military fake and gay or whatever. And
Yeah.
there's inevitably there's like during the vaccine mandates, right? Like I was telling a bunch of, Zoomer anons who kind of expressed some interest in being in the military, and they would acknowledge all the reasons you told them why not to, right? And you're
Sure.
like, hey, you're gonna go get blown up in some dumb bullshit in Syria. Hey, they're gonna force you to take the vax, and it's gonna have health complications for you down the road. Hey, they're not gonna treat you well. Look, they've got Fulbert colonels wearing fetish dog masks and
Yep.
transgender, tranny admirals, and just all these terrible things are going on. And they would go, yeah, I know, but I kind of really want to do it anyway. And there's just something. you know, you just there's something about the camaraderie and fraternity of the military and the experience itself of being in that world that is always going to draw
Yes.
young men to want to enlist, even in the worst of conditions and the worst and most fake and gay of times. And I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I should support that because maybe, some of those people will kind of make a dent. The problem is I know, intellectually I know the enlisted guys aren't going to change anything in the culture there. They might help out some other people. They might influence their immediate circle of people that they're around during their time while they're in and maybe make it a better place for a couple people.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the officer corps is so paused that the U.S. military is not going to get any better until we fix that, and that means fixing the college problem. And these are all very big problems.
Yeah. Well, the
Um,
West Point, of course, college, but West Point is apparently
well,
just
even the Air Force Academy. I mean, I've got people I talk to all over. There's an Anon who's he's a cadet at the Air Force Academy right now,
mm,
who tells me about all the stupid shit that's going on there.
oh man, I could not imagine being in today during the Biden administration. Absolute
So
nightmare.
I would say my two best kind of glimpses into what's going on the active duty side and on the officer pipeline is the Anon who's at the Air Force Academy, and then I have a friend who's he's a police commander who has a law degree, and he just
Oh damn,
decided to go and get commissioned as a JAG officer in the Army Reserves.
damn. All right, good.
And he's an older guy, right? So he's never
Yeah,
been in the military. Older guy, mature, used to handling responsibility, big metropolitan police department commander. Um, and so he's going through, the training school to commission as a JAG officer, and he's with like young people, old people, all sorts of
yeah,
people, and he's like, man, like this is pathetic. He's telling me stories about what's going on at field training, the general disposition of the people who are there trying to get a commission and become officers. And
yeah.
he's like, man, it's like 70% really bad shit lib. And nobody wants to talk. No one's talking about politics right now because of the election, but you can just tell.
Yes.
You can just tell that like well over half of these people who want to be officers are just soft, like terrible shit lib people, especially
These
the
are not the
women.
people you want to have in a foxhole with you.
Well, they're not leaders. They're
Yeah.
just they're just surplus college grads. We need to have somewhere to funnel them that isn't the military so we can exclude the officer class to be something that attracts the type of people who are actually interested in it. Instead of making it a fucking welfare jobs program for people with bachelor's degrees.
Or pay for your
Um,
transition into, whatever it
well,
is.
yeah, that type of shit's even worse. So I mean, I don't know, man. I'm beside myself on it because I know that um I don't know if I would recommend somebody enlist at this point because, the wars are fake and gay and stupid.
Mm.
The officer corps is terrible, and this is all predicated on like how much time are we going to need to fix this and how much effort are we going to be able to put into fixing this, right? Like, could we get 4 years of Trump and 8 years of JD Vance, and, or something like
Would that
that?
be enough to fix it, you
Yeah,
think?
yeah, that's you got to wonder, right? You got to go, okay, well, in 12 years, could we like unfuck the military and then go,
Mm.
well, what are the odds we end up getting into? I have this feeling that the next war that we get into isn't going to be some retarded proxy war or dust up in some other country. I think it's going to
Sure.
be something a little bit more existential, and I
Mm.
think it's going to be
Interesting.
something where individual soldiers um, are not really moving the needle. You know what I mean? Who
Yes.
wants to get blown up by a fucking drone? That's not soldiering. There's
Yeah. And
nothing
I
particularly gallant there.
I predict the days of, Lockheed is putting, I don't what is the cost of an F-35 right now? Billions, zillion dollars.
Way too
Uh,
much for what you
yeah.
get.
And it's the same thing that we're experiencing in the Red Sea. We're firing Patriot missiles and they're blowing them up. The Houthi rebels are blowing up little drones. So, couple $1 million rocket is getting taken out with a couple
Well,
thousand
yeah, they're
dollar.
they're bleeding the dragon, and I mean this has always been the way it's been, right? Like
Yeah, the
defense
counterinsurgents.
defense always costs more than offense, right? Like
Mhm.
a suit of armor that can block a spear tip is way more expensive and costly to manufacture than the spear. And it's
Sure.
always been
Yeah,
that
good
way.
point.
And the problem, the people who win are the people who can absorb casualties.
Yeah.
And obviously you don't throw bodies at it, only works to a certain point. You only have, yeah, you're always going to have an acceptable margin of casualties. But
Yeah.
the thing is if there is not the political and the cultural will to fight a war,
Yeah.
we're just not going to win it. Technology is not going to be enough if we ever
Mhm.
get into like an actual war with like another people,
Yes.
with China, with Russia, with Iran. And I don't even want to go to war with any of those guys. I
Yeah,
don't
for
even want
sure.
it's just going to distract us from all the problems that we have domestically. I don't want to war with any of those adversaries. I
Mm.
mean, because no matter what, even winning, this would be different. This would be the type of war where we would have adversaries who could hit us on the home front, not with an invasion, but it's tacky to invoke fifth generation warfare all the time. But yeah,
Sure.
you know what? There's going to be fucking cyber attacks and our infrastructure is fucking weak and there's going to be random dudes rolling up on important substations and shooting up all the transformers with an AK and driving off.
Boats
Just
crashing into bridges, let's
yeah,
say.
boats crashing into bridges. It'd be fucking terrible. I mean, yeah, whatever. We could win. I think the U.S. could win in any conventional warfare hard power situation. But the problem is when you're not fighting a policing action against a third world country, um, like actual nations, even ones that aren't as big or as wealthy or as powerful as us,
Yeah.
they do have the force projection to fight in other domains, whether it's
Yes.
cyber or it's sabotage or it's any of those types of things. And I think the DoD is ignoring that. I think the government's ignoring that. And to be honest, I think the defense industry, one way or another, they want another big fucking war, and they keep steering us towards it. NATO wants us to go to war with Russia. They're fucking
Yeah, for sure.
slobbering at the mouth over the opportunity to go wipe out Russia. And the
Yeah.
problem is the Trump camp ain't going to be any better, um, because they're going to be drooling at the mouth to go to war with fucking Iran on Israel's behalf. So we're
Sure.
kind of screwed either way. And I'd like to point out for the same retards who made that fucking video,
I
I'm
was
not
about to say,
shy
you're out of the
about
Zionist community now, my
no,
friend.
I'm not fucking shy about that. Like, yeah, that's one of the biggest drawbacks to
Yeah.
the Trump administration, right? That was one of
Pledging
the things.
allegiance to any other
Well,
nation.
that was one of the things we hated about the first one, but it doesn't mean that, I think this administration will be a pretty good one domestically, I
Yes.
think, as long as we don't have some sort of, fifth generation warfare fuckery going on where we're like getting major cities or getting their power cut or
Yeah.
whatever stupid shenanigans might happen, right?
I wouldn't
Um,
put it past them. I wouldn't
Well,
put it
yeah,
past
sure.
them.
And
Yeah.
and I think that this will be a good administration domestically. I'm not
Mm.
black-pilled on that.
Mm.
But I am worried about how foreign policy is going to go. But then again,
Yeah.
on the other hand, Trump did keep us out of getting into any new wars the first time. And,
Yes.
at great effort on his part to keep us out of expanding our role in Syria and staying out of, different types of wars. I mean, to his credit, the first administration, um, he did keep us from starting anything new, and he
One of
was
the
trying to
observation,
pull out.
yeah, one of the observations I would make about this is, um, people don't know what he's capable of. So there's a bluff there. And so, like, nations around the world were like, hey, I think Russia invaded Crimea under the prior administration, and now they're in,
Well, because they knew
invading.
Obama was a pussy. Like
Right.
Putin called Obama's bluff and was
Yeah.
like, "Yep,
But here's the point, I think, is that if someone does cross a red line for Trump and he cannot not respond, I'm curious to see what type of response. Maybe he claims to have said to Putin, like, "Hey man, nice city you got here. Be a shame if I had to fucking turn it into a parking lot." So if it does come to it, my curiosity would be, what would be the nature of his response, and would it be like like it would be a WWE event that we might not, any of us survive. I don't know, but yes, absolutely to his credit, he was able to. I mean, they're doing badass shit like just walking across the DMZ into North Korea.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
wild, dude. I love that.
Trump's foreign policy was really, really undersold, I think.
Yes, I agree with that.
Everyone was talking about domestic stuff, but I think Trump's foreign policy team gave us the best results of any
Yes,
president's
yeah,
foreign policy team
yeah,
that I've seen in my lifetime, that I've been around to consciously understand.
yes.
We didn't get into any new wars. Trump was fostering a lot of good alliances. India, for better or worse, I'm gonna get shit for this, but
The
India
Pajits
India
defender.
is important
Yes,
because they've
for sure.
always been the biggest non-aligned country. And on the one hand, they play both sides of the fence because of that, because
Yes.
during the Cold War, they knew that the Soviets wanted them in and they knew the West wanted them in. And so they would take stuff
Mhm.
from both of us and then not,
Yes.
fully commit to anything. Um, but
Yeah.
Trump making the relationships that he was making with Abe and Modi and
Correct.
Bolsonaro, those were really important key strategic
Yeah.
relationships that a
And Imran
Democrat
Khan as
president,
well.
well, and what, yeah, and what a Democrat president would have thumbed their nose at, or even a neocon,
Yes.
they
Yes.
would have just thumbed their nose at
Yeah.
making those relationships. But when we look at what we can expect from those regions for the next 20 years, it's really important, right? Like you've got, you go and you make friends with Bolsonaro when he was in Brazil, and it's like, well, you're getting into all these BRICS nations to try and disrupt that, to build
Yes.
friendships and dependencies with them. And
Yes.
most of all, having a solid friendship with, India and Japan under Shinzo and Modi, who are, relatively nationalistic leaders for their cultures, for what they've had for the last
Yes.
20 years. Um, you're also kind of encircling China.
Correct.
And
Correct.
that's why they'd be idiots not to be befriending the hell out of India, which, I mean, look, let's look at how pajeted up this cabinet is.
I was gonna say. I was
It's
gonna
obvious
say.
that that's part of why. Like we're trying to get India on the hook because they're going to be the anvil that's like sitting right next to China all day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's why. And the drawback to that, which is going to be something that I'm going to be watching for and being
Mm,
incredibly critical of this next Trump administration on,
mm.
is that because they're not going to want to offend the Jeets, they're going to be really reticent to send a lot of those white collar H-1B types back. And those are the people I want to send back the fucking most.
Yeah. Well, I
Uh,
see nonstop problems with the we're sending them back. I don't honestly know if the average American has a stomach for the visuals of what that will actually look like. So
I hope they do because I'd love to see it happen. I think Tom Homan's going to try.
they better, man. I'd be more than happy to sign up for, I don't know what
Oh yeah, man. Hell
give,
yeah.
give me a letter of mark and I'm out, man. I'm out,
Bounties on
dude.
bounties on the heads of anybody that you can get deported. I
I
don't
know
know.
I'm seeing stuff like that. So it's like you're gonna get roving gangs. So yeah, there's gonna be hiccups and stuff. The American public has got to be prepared for that. I think
The
to
the
minimize it
problem
on
is that
television.
it's easy to get the illegals out on the basis that you have legal justification and leverage to do it.
Yeah.
It becomes a PR problem the longer you let them be here because they have kids and things like that.
Yes.
And that was always the thing, right? Is the Democrats have always the libs, well, including the Republicans, right? Like, let's just
Mm,
be honest, the Uniparty has always slow walked the solution to this problem
mm.
because they know that it will be unsolvable if you
Yes.
wait long enough and these people are embedded
Yeah.
enough in society familially with children or
Yes.
grandchildren or any of that, then good luck, you're never going to get them out.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a lot of urgency behind this. Like
Mm,
we need to like all these new like Centracas, like they're not even Mexicans anymore. They're
yes.
Venezuelans and Salvadoranians and Panamanians. These people
Correct.
we need to get them the fuck out fast because
Yes.
we don't want them to be a permanent fucking fixture here.
One of the
Um,
things I see a strong parallel between the actions that Israel's taking in Palestine to get rid of the, Hamas guys there. One of the things that Trump keeps saying is like, yeah, I get it. I understand you do have a right of self-defense, but let's get it done quick. The world, the what is the jury of your peers are watching you, and they don't have a lot of patience if you drag this shit out. So whatever you got to do, let's get it done and quick. So whatever all the actions you plan on taking, let's do them in a week rather than 6 months. Because if you get it
I
all done
mean,
in a week, you're
yeah,
fine.
you get a big PR problem if you have to make something like that an ongoing operation and
Yeah.
you aren't shooting journalists who try to cover it or something. Um, the
Well, that's always an option. I'm
the problem in the context of it with Israel is they're just never going to stop, I feel like
sure, of
they
course.
want to just keep expanding and expanding and they're just not going to fucking stop. Like even if we got Saudi Arabia and a bunch of other Arab nations to go ahead and recognize them, they would find some way to be pissing off and trying to make gains in, Lebanon or Syria. I have a feeling I've seen news that's gone in both directions saying they are and also saying they aren't, but
Mm,
it sounds like there's a bunch of the Druze communities in southern and southwestern Syria that are near
mm.
the border to Israel are talking about how they want Israel to annex their section.
Oh, wow.
And that's going to be terrible, right? Because what happens, right? Israel's going to be like, "Oh, we need a buffer zone so that the Syrians can't bomb the Jews." And then they're going to go ahead and do that and piss off all the Muslims. The Muslims are going to bomb them in response.
Yeah.
And then the cycle just perpetuates itself. And yeah,
Don't.
to a degree, I wish
Yeah.
we could just get the whole thing fucking over with and turn
Yes.
all of it into a parking lot
Yeah.
so that I never had to hear any dispensationalist bullshit ever again.
And you won't see your picture on a video again with these kind of accusations. Um,
Well, sure.
yeah, the least of our worries, I guess. Yeah, bomb the Druze, not the Jews. So,
It just seems like a very big distraction. I'm 100% of my focus is on domestic issues in America and like
yes. Yeah.
cultural health of the country. And all this crap is a distraction. And I get annoyed as hell whether it's people who don't want to shut up about like the poor brown people in Palestine or it's boomer Christians who won't shut up about Israel's our greatest ally. We love Israel. It's a distraction. And one of the things that's really key, I think, is that over the last 30 years or so, it's become very apparent that Americans are selectively allowed to become genocidal nationalists, but not for their own country. They're allowed to
Sure.
become bloodthirsty on behalf of someone else. Americans are allowed to be the most bloodthirsty, nationalistic, genocidal cheerleaders, but only if it's another country like Israel or Ukraine or
Sure.
someone on the approved list. You're not allowed
Yeah.
to do that for your own country, and
Yeah.
that's the problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, we're looking at you, Lindsey Graham.
Well, and the thing is though is what I worry about is I think something is going to happen eventually here because I don't think that that worldview or that relationship has lasting runway at this point. I don't think
Hmm.
nobody under 40 cares about any of this shit. Like,
Sure.
dispensationalism and like the pro-Israel politics
Hmm.
and all that, it's not popular with anyone under 40 and it's not going to become popular.
Yeah.
Like that seems like it's over. So
I think,
some within my lifetime, I think that dynamic is going to end. The
yes.
question is how messy is the ending going to be?
Interesting. What do you predict? I think you're very good at like I assume you have a magic 8 ball over there somewhere. You're always very prescient
Man,
your
I
prediction.
don't I don't know. That whole thing is such a messy Gordian knot to untangle, and
Mm,
there's a lot of really bad ways that it could end. But
yep.
I think that paradigm is going to change in a
Yes.
fundamental way sometime in my lifetime. And I don't know if it's, America buckles under the strain of problems
Sure.
and for its own self-preservation, Israel decides to pivot to the Silk Road and to BRICS and all this type of stuff. I mean, that's
Yeah.
always a possibility. I don't know how
Interesting.
likely that would be to succeed. But on the flip side, though, is, if Israel gets destroyed, what's going to happen? They're going to try to use it to psyop a new wave of sympathy where they're going to be like, "Oh,
Mm,
take them all in," and then we're going to kind of go right back to the same
mm.
problems that we've had.
My
It's
hope
going
is
to
that
be like
people will wake up. I don't
Holocaust
know.
2.0.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I think the national debt, what is it, like 35 trillion or something ridiculous like this. And I think that the average person looks around and you ask them, so what do we have to show for that? Like, let's go to Philadelphia, let's go to um, Baltimore, let's go to Detroit. Let's look at all these, once great American cities. Everyone's they're just drugged out zombies there, and the industries have been gutted, and it's extremely difficult for the average American to make a livable wage. And the normal jobs, the kind of the salt of the earth jobs that, the teacher and a cop and a firefighter and maybe a hairdresser, these guys are they're underwater, a lot of
Yeah.
them. And it's like, there's got to be a moment. And I think, again, one of your prescient observations about this Luigi assassin guy is that there's a kind of, this is, I think, going to tap into a growing dissatisfaction amongst the Antifa type. And I think that most Antifas are people who, it seems to me, thought, well, I finished high school. What am I to do now? I would say, well, you go to college. Oh, I'm going to college. Well, what are you going to do in college? I have no idea. Well, just let's get a job, a degree in basket weaving and lesbian
Yeah.
studies and all of this shit. And they come out $100,000, $200,000 in debt. Absolutely no chance of repaying that school loan, okay, or getting a job in your field, whatever that may be. And all of these people are living in their parents' basements and they're disenfranchised.
Well,
So
I
this,
think I think that's the common thread you hit on right there, though, is it's disenfranchisement. I've
yes,
often said that like every millennial is a political extremist. It just
yes,
depends which kind. And
yeah. In which direction?
yeah, and that's because of disenfranchisement. Like
Yes,
for us, we're getting older, right? And I don't know, the thought of fixing the country is obviously important to me, but part of me is like, you know what? If we don't fix this shit until I'm like 70 years old, I'm gonna be so pissed off because I'm gonna
right.
go, my entire, my best years of my entire life were spent, rolling up my sleeves and trying to fix this instead of getting to enjoy it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That your life changed in 2001 with the September
yeah,
11th event. It changed in 2008 with the financial crash. It changed I mean, if you think about it, the people who, I mean, a high school senior who was in lockdown over the COVID era, let's say
yeah,
they
yeah.
lost
This
two
They
years of their
radicalized
life.
the hell out of a bunch of Zoomers with that.
Yeah, 2 years of their
COVID.
life. You're 20 years old. You lost 2 years of your life. That's 10% of your life that just went
Yeah,
down the toilet. All right. You missed all the normal dating and the prom and the high school and the games and all this shit was taken away from you. So
yeah.
those people are
Well, and they seem to have
particularly
all cleaved
pissed.
right, or at least the boys anyway. I mean,
Mm, mm.
I can say that, I look at Gen Z as kind of like an extension of the 4chan and Tumblr war because they're
Okay.
so they're so online that they're very exposed to the dynamics of
Interesting.
that. And I
Interesting.
mean, looking at the way the election went, we own like Gen Z males, the right does. Like
Yes.
we own like lock, stock, and barrel at a level that, you know, the right didn't own the male vote of my generation when I was the age that Zoomers are now.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
it was so they're way further to the right at their age than either of our generations were at the same age
Absolutely.
that they are now. And the thing
Absolutely.
is, though, is I don't think mo in most cases, I don't think once people go to the right, they usually don't ever cleave left later in life.
Yes. I agree with that.
Conservatism is a position that never really seems to give way to progressivism unless you have a really weird midlife crisis or something. But um, and the thing is like say this election really showed that the main polarization was along gender lines to where you had it was the male versus female election where it was straight men and married women voting against single women and gay men. And
Mm,
obviously there ain't enough faggots for for them to
no.
make up that difference. But
No. No.
even in minority votes, I'm not trying to say Irma Gerd, we need the based blacks or any stupid shit like that. But I'm saying even there's interesting statistical differences when you look at, even the minority vote and you go like, man, we sunk a majority of men. Um, it's very quickly starting to cleave to where, I don't know, the woman question is becoming very, very prescient here. And
Well, maybe you chose the appropriate avatar for the moment.
I guess, but I don't know, man. I just think with millennials, that's the deal though, is we're all radicalized over being kind of disenfranchised. Even those of us who, have money or anything like that, just the culture is money can't buy culture.
Mm,
It's
good.
if your
That's a good
society
quote.
is fucked up, like what are you going to do? It doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, you're still living in the favela. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, you're the
So I don't know.
king
I
of
think
king
I
of
think the only
shit.
way to fix this stuff is to have undistracted leadership that has the authority and the vigorous intent to solve some of these problems. And by that I mean like, like let's say you take a guy like Tom Homan, like by all appearances at least, he seems to be a 100% focused, single-minded guy
Yes.
on doing his one little slice of the pie.
Yes.
Um, we need people with that mindset on all sorts of issues that we have in the country. We need to have people who are just single-minded and undistracted in their pursuit of fixing a particular problem, who are
Mm.
empowered to do it.
Yeah.
And that includes not being distracted by all these retarded conflicts that are being brought to us from, other like ethnic minorities and
Yes.
influence from other nations and lobbying Congress, whether that's, Israel or whether it's Iran or whether it's, NATO countries in Europe that don't want to ever have to, have a military budget of their own, so they want the status quo to stay forever.
Yeah. Sort of a
Um,
protectorate of the United States. Let it go. Let
it's
him
it's
out.
just that the problem of empire is that when you become a big enough and powerful enough military power, it becomes cheaper for small nations to use their GDP to bribe and buy your politicians than to build their own
Interesting.
armies to protect
Interesting.
themselves against their neighbors. So it's cheaper to go buy influence in Congress. Like, I don't know, let's pick a small country. Let's say you're frickin' Luxembourg or Montenegro or something.
Yeah.
You don't have the GDP to have an army that can do anything to any of your neighbors. Like you don't have the people even to do that. You
Sure.
don't have you don't have the manpower, you don't have the money, but you do have you are still a country that has a
Yeah.
GDP that's in, billions of dollars.
Hmm.
You can go and get extreme dividends on using that money to lobby American Congress to say,
Sure.
oh yeah, we're going to go drop a military base in your country,
Mm.
or we're going to negotiate this, with your neighbors for you. Like we're the fulcrum of power in the world, and the problem with that is
Mm.
that it means every other foreign country, every other ethnic conflict, every single thing revolves around the fact that it is easier and cheaper to just buy our people out to make us solve it for them.
Yes. Yes.
So
I,
nobody's building anything on their own. Look at Bukele. Bukele in El Salvador is the first guy in like, the last 20 years
yes.
to just show up in his own country and fix his own fucking problems
Yeah.
without just relying on us to do it for him.
And in Argentina, of course, Milei is in the process of doing it as well. So, hey,
Yeah.
I've seen the problem, and the problem is us. Do you think this is something that we can fix?
The problem is it's the boring stuff. That's going to be the hard
Mm.
part. Nobody likes the boring stuff. Nobody likes to become a policy wonk and understand an issue really comprehensively and then go and try to fix it. And like it's very easy to bitch about problems, but it's hard to actually fully understand them and then figure out where do I need to be to help roll this boulder forward and fix this problem, and can I even get there, right? Like if you want to fix Section 8 housing, like Section 8 housing really pisses you off, right?
Yeah.
Then, you learn everything about it and you're writing threads about it on Twitter, and people are learning about how fucked up that system is and
Yes.
the damage it does and all these things. And then you become an expert on it. Well, if you want to actually change it, other than the fact that, maybe some media outlets might see stuff that you've written, or maybe you start writing articles about HUD and Section 8 and all these things that get
Okay.
published at major publications. Like you're spreading awareness there, but you're not necessarily fixing it. You're hoping someone else reads your stuff who like works at HUD and decides to go fix it, right? Maybe you even have all the ideas for how to fix it. Um,
But to
so
implement them.
yeah, how do you implement them, right? Well, either you're going to do it yourself, which means guess what? You got to get political and you got to figure out how you can be the next like HUD secretary, or at least go work in that department and become a policy guy and eventually get the power to lobby changes from inside of an institution. But that translates to, hey, go get a government job and work your way up the ladder and have to be subject to all of the HR, shrews and to do all those things that suck about working for the government. You might
And
even have to
dodge the
move to DC.
corruption. Yeah, dodge the corruption, and you'd be a wolf in sheep's and gay
Yeah.
sheep's clothing. You'd have to navigate through the labyrinth of
And
HR
and
mammies.
and now is the best time to start, given if you're a subject matter expert in, any particular thing and you feel like you have the solutions and want to fix it, now is a better time than ever to try and throw your hat in the ring while this next administration wants to pull in all these outsiders to solve problems, um, and to figure out who to talk to and how to be heard that you have an interest and to show your work and to do those things. It's just that it's hard, but we need someone who can do that for like every fucking issue in this country. And the thing is, most people don't want to do it because one, it's boring.
Yeah,
Policy is boring unless
yes,
you're someone who just really particularly likes to learn about something because
yes.
you hate it or you think it's interesting or whatever, or maybe it's already your job in some respect. So most people would rather bitch. Most people would rather bitch about it because doing things is hard. And especially doing things like that where you want to fix things at the nation level, that's very hard. And to do that, you're going to need a network and you're going to need to know people and going to need to figure out what circles you need to be in. And there's going to be all sorts of weird shit that, you're going to have to ignore or bypass or figure out in your journey to go be like the next HUD secretary or whatever.
I think that's one of the, for me, one of the most exciting things about this time to have, as you do, as many of the people in our circle do, um, getting an invite from IM 1776, and I went up to Nashville and saw a talk with Eric Prince. I mean, that's something. This may be our guys are in with the guys who matter. And
Y-
so it's like being this close to the people who do make a difference. This is the closest we've ever been, and this may be the closest we ever get. And so I feel like there's a timeliness now to be able to
Yeah.
strike and take like to go full force. And if the similar types of things happen to Trump in 2.0 that happen in 1.0, all the wreckers and
Well,
dragging
yeah, I
along
mean,
and
the,
blocking
the
his
the best
agenda.
time to get started on pushing this boulder up the hill was yesterday, but second best time is today. You know,
Exactly.
might as well
Exactly.
if you care enough to be the person to really do it. It's just the problem is it's not as easy as casually bitching about other things that, you can't change or things that don't matter. I mean, I think more people need to take a look at problems like this structurally. I think more anons need to go, let's isolate this problem, let's understand how it works, and then let's decide like what do we got to do to solve it? Like what do we actually got to do in the real world to go fix it? What needs to happen? And what realistic steps would actually get us there instead of just wish casting all the time and saying, well, um, they're going to declare Trump the monarch and then he's just going to use executive power to immediately do it all. Like, yeah, that's probably not how it's going to happen. So,
Probably not.
you know, you
Yeah.
you got to figure out like be realistic. How are you going to get there? And you have to be okay with the idea that it might take you 10 years to get where you're trying to go. Like I don't know, this is a multi-generational project fixing the United States, the way that I look at it.
You have a large audience, and so in closing, where would you direct the eyes of your audience to see what needs to be seen and to take inspiration from our peers, from your peers? What are some of the accounts maybe that you would recommend people look at, some of the people that you think are doing it right?
Um, I don't know. I've been kind of short on like there's people that I like for there's people who don't necessarily opine on stuff all the time, but who have very good minds when they do. Like I like Lee. Like I don't know if you short mag SMLE. Like Lee the we call him Lee the Younger because he gets compared to Lafayette Lee in his
Yeah,
account. But
I do know he's on one of the chats there.
yeah, Lee is great.
Okay.
There's a lot of people out there who are great, but
Shout
the
out to
thing
Lee the
is,
Younger.
yeah. So there's I don't know, man. There's a lot of people out there. I don't necessarily even really have favorites. Most of what I do is I just like to look at. I have a lot of lists for like different news aggregators, like Insider Paper and people like that. and I just look at what's going on, and then I go ahead and I hit the quote tweets, and I see who's saying what, and some people have a good take, some people have a bad take, some people just want to tell a joke, and that's fine, you know. You just kind of got to use your intuition and discernment and figure it out. That's about the best you can do. Oh, I would recommend Tyrant's Muse on Twitter, Patrick Ryan. He's one of the smartest guys that I've ever had the pleasure of knowing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dude's a
Good.
genius, but
Great recommendation. Those are all great recommendations. Man, I appreciate your time. It's been long overdue. I'm glad to have you on. I thank you so much for your time and your insight. I think you've got like your finger on the pulse of things. So I always recommend people check out your timeline.
thanks, man. I appreciate it. Good talk.
Hey, all right, brother. Thank you so much. We'll see you out there in the Twitter universe or the X, I guess. I have to get used to saying X.
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever gonna get there.
No, I know. I know. Exceed. I fucking can't say zeeted. I zeeted. Jesus.
I, I'm more comfortable saying Z than calling Twitter X. I just
Yeah.
saying, oh, I was on X. Like that's I don't know.
You're say no to drugs, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Funny. All right, maybe one day. Maybe it'll catch on. You know, if anyone can do it, I'm sure Elon can. Hey, man,
Yeah,
thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by and sharing a little bit of your ideas with us. So we'll see you out there, man. Thank you so much.
no problem, man. Thanks.
All right, all right.